Now, the UK is now the first country in Europe with over 100,000 deaths from coronavirus. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he accepts responsibility as the public questions his government's handling of the crisis.
We truly did everything we could and continue to do everything that we can to minimise loss of life and to minimise suffering in what has been a very, very difficult stage and a very, very difficult crisis for our country.
Joining us now with more, our senior executive editor, David Merritt. David, good morning to you. A lot of yesterday then was spent not on new measures, not on talking much about what happens from here. It was spent very much reflecting on 100,000 lives lost. A difficult one for the Prime Minister to deal with there, as we saw him having to answer questions about that yesterday.
Yes, absolutely, and a very different Boris Johnson on display at that press conference yesterday, downbeat, very sombre in tone. None of the optimism that we associate more with him, no talk about how fast we're going to get out of this situation, really just reflecting on that awful death toll. Stopping short of an apology, though, notably, perhaps, for government actions. And as we just heard, this claim that the government did everything that they could, that is something that is already coming back to haunt him slightly. And questions still being asked, as they have been for the past year, about the speed of the government's actions. The first lockdown back last March, how many lives could have been saved if they'd moved sooner? And then this current lockdown, the third we're having as well, whilst the death rate remains so high, if the government had acted sooner, could that have been brought down? These are the questions that Boris Johnson's going to have to face increasingly over the coming months.
David, does the government get credit for doing a good job with the vaccine rollout? I mean, I know every country's national media thinks that their government is doing the worst job, but the UK is unquestionably ahead of its European peers.
Well, that is certainly true, and it is the one bright spot in the government's record on this. There's a huge spat, of course, going on in the European Union with AstraZeneca about their deliveries, and their chief executive gave interviews yesterday where he pointed out that Britain was 3 months ahead of the European Union negotiating their contract, and that explains why they've got so much of the supply sorted out in advance. So yes, a bright spot. Mr. Johnson's been very keen to trumpet this over the last few weeks. To say again, he wasn't doing that last night. It wasn't really the time to do that. But now you can expect the government very much to pivot the focus away from the horrific death toll onto this very rapid progress on the vaccination. There is a question, of course, about the second dosages of this. Those very high numbers are people getting their first dose, remember that, and the full efficacy isn't there until the second doses come. But nevertheless, we are hoping, and the government are hoping, to see a change in both the very high hospitalisation and the death rates. And you can imagine the government are going to latch onto that and try to show that finally they are getting ahead of this pandemic and notably ahead of the rest of many countries around the world.